Hello everyone and welcome back to Hickory Lane Studios. Today I thought I would take you through the process of creating my new favorite model horse in my collection. This is another Norwegian Dolahess model horse. As you might remember, I created one a few months back. I believe I finished him in March or April, and I felt really inspired to create another one. So I gathered some reference pictures, I thought up a color, and I got started. For the base, I will be using the Collecta Hackney Stallion, and I used this model for creating Sleipnir as well. He is the previous Norwegian Dolahest that I made, and I really love this mold. It's kind of chunky like a doll horse would be, and I actually have two because I'm making more of these and you can't stop me. So let's get on to creating. I shaved down the casting seams on all four legs as well as the text on the belly, which I filled in with some epoxy sculpt. Then I found my reference picture. This is actually a Dale pony, but you know what, close enough. They're not at all similar breeds, but I like the pose and we're gonna go with it. So I need to cut off this horse's neck and legs. So I draw lines for where I'll cut to make that process easier. I look at my reference pictures while doing this and see how the legs move and how the head moves to determine where I need to cut. Alright, all the lines are drawn and now I know where I need to cut. So let's take the boy out to the garage to do that. So once I take the boy out to my garage, I can put him in a vise in between a mask because you know what, that works for padding, right? You guys, it works. And then I get my dad to help me because he's a lot better at making those precise cuts with the jeweler's saw. If you are a younger viewer though, I would highly recommend that you get an adult to help you with this step. Alright, he has been successfully decapitated. Now my dad cuts off the neck because that needs to go as well. And then I had to go at cutting off the tail. Did it go well? Not really. I'm not very good at cutting off tails, but you know what? It looks fine. It'll be okay. Alright, I take my dad's drill, and then the drill and the pony can head back to my room and we can continue crafting. Does anybody else think that this horse and this bird look alike? If you do, tell me in the comments. Alright, I clean up the cut areas around the neck and the tail and shave off any excess bits that shouldn't be there that I didn't get with the saw. Then I put the neck and that ugly stump of a tail into my spare horse parts bag. I don't know what I'll ever do with these. I don't know when I'll use them. Then I turn my kettle on and I draw this little diagram of the different legs, and then I can pour water into my bowl. Now you might know what's coming. Yes, I burn my horse in water. I'm a horrible human being, I know. He sits in the water until his legs are fully bendy, and then I can take him out. Usually about 3 minutes or so for most Collecta models. Anyways, then I can grab out my craft knife and cut off his legs. Alright, great. He's officially just a body and all the legs are in their allotted spaces. Then I cut them up into little itty bitty chunks because I need to string them back on in a different position. I round out the cut parts of the legs as well while I'm at it so that the sharp edges of the plastic don't stick through the resculpted clay. Here I was just playing with how I was gonna readjust those legs once they went back on, and I set that all up in this picture. I make little marks on the legs as to where I will drill into them to make sure that they're lined up. Then I grab my dad's drill and I can start drilling into all the leg pieces and the head piece and the body. Now, this time I was so bad at drilling, oh my goodness gracious. I kept like going through the legs. I couldn't drill in a straight line. I don't know what happened, but I even ended up drilling through the horse's face. Not supposed to happen. And through his leg. So, don't get drilling tips from me. I decided I needed to cut more of this leg, I guess, so I did that. And I stringed them all together, and they looked pretty good. I was pretty happy with them. It was a really frustrating drilling process, so I was happy that he was standing and looked really good. Then I took the pony back out to the garage to find a piece of wood suitable for the base. He didn't stay standing for long. Once I attached the head and added almost a pound of epoxy, he got really unstable and tipped over. So this piece of wood actually has a car on it that I think I carved when I was little. So I'm going to use it, but I'm going to preserve the car on the bottom, don't worry. So it fits in quite perfectly and looks really nice. So I think this will be the piece. I spent an entire eternity not only just drilling into the wood, but making sure that his feet lined up with the holes that I would be drilling in. So it was a lot of work to get his feet to fit in the holes, and I think I had like 16 minutes of footage from this. I don't know what I was doing for 16 minutes, but you know what? We finally got it figured out, and I ended up with a finished product that I liked. Then I flesh out the neck with some painter's tape. That not only helps the epoxy stick to it better, but it also helps me have to use less epoxy during the whole process because, it takes up some space. Speaking of epoxy, let's mix that up and put it on. This is just a rough first pass. It's nothing special. I don't put a lot of effort into it, and I don't make it look too nice. I smeared around with my fingers and use a silicone sculpting tool to smooth it out a bit. It's important to have a rather smooth base, but it can be a bit lumpy. Just to make sure it's not too lumpy or chunky in random places. Water is your best friend when using epoxy. I've heard that rubbing alcohol works as well, but I've also heard that it can make it a bit mushy. So I have a cup of water that I use for my paint as well. That's why the inside is all full of paint. But it really helps with smoothing down the neck or whatever you're sculpting. And here's our first pass. It's pretty smooth, but again, nothing perfect, and it's a lot thinner than the eventual neck will be. So now let's start on the second pass, once the first pass has cured for 24 hours. I'm starting with the muscle groups, so I use a big lump of epoxy, and I find with the neck you need more epoxy than you think you will need because of these big muscles that you need to sculpt in. And I know this looks like absolute trash right now, but I assure you it will get better in the end. I use my finger, my silicone sculpting tool, and the water to smooth out this big muscle group here at the top of the neck. I have a tendency to make my necks look a bit square and blockish at the bottom, so if you have any tips for that, leave that in the comments below, because I don't know, I find like the bottom can get very square, and I don't know how to explain it properly, but it's not like detailed enough or something down there. I'm not entirely sure what I do wrong, but it's something. So if you have any tips, please drop those down below. Next, I turn my attention to the base of the neck. I blend that into both the plastic and the existing epoxy, and then I can detail that later on to make it kind of blend well into the shoulder muscles. I spent a lot of time on this neck, but I'm really happy I did. Probably over 2 hours just on the second pass. I'm really happy I did though, because I think the whole thing turned out really great. I add some muscling on the shoulders and some details there, and then the neck is finally finished once I smooth everything out. I'm really happy with this neck, hands down. I think it's the best one I've ever sculpted, and I'm really proud of myself. Alright, let's fill in the many cracks between the legs. First though, I use a compass to check the proportions. This is a really handy dandy tool, and I would recommend you get one. So the legs, they are quite difficult to sculpt. I find they are really prone to looking chunky and kind of bulbous, if you will, because if you use too much epoxy, that can kind of really make them look very, very large and very chunky in some spots and then thin in other spots. So you have to be really careful about the legs. I find like I use a lot of epoxy for the neck, and then I go in with that same mindset while doing the legs, and it never works out for me. But I slowly but surely started to fill them all in, but I was not sure about this front one. I kept checking it against my reference picture over and over and over. I wasn't sure if I liked it or not, so I tried to sculpt it, but it looked so bad when I was done with it. It looked nothing like it originally had. I think that all of that epoxy weight had just weighed it down completely. It looked so bad, and it couldn't even stand up on its own. It would break. So anyways, I finally came to a solution, which I did off camera because I was so frustrated, but it looks a lot better now, I think. One of my favorite parts of making these fluffy horses is the feathers, for sure, and here I'm going to be teaching you guys my feather technique. So as you can see, I've already made 3 feathers on the other legs, and now I'm going to make this feather on the last leg because I think it's time. So first I make this little lump on the leg in the shape of a feather of solid epoxy, and I just take my time blending it into the rest of the leg, making sure that it looks its nicest and that it looks like part of the horse, like it's growing out of the horse itself. Then I use a regular old sewing needle to make these kind of indents into the feather that look like hair, and I do that in the direction that the hair would be flowing. My mom got me a set of tons of different sizes of needles, so I find that can really help with getting a cool texture in there by using the different sizes. After my work with the needle is done, I take out my silicone sculpting tool and I kind of blend the hairs better into the clay. The good thing about this is it kind of widens them a bit, which makes it easier to paint, and it also brings out the detail, smooths it out, reduces the pilling, and it just makes it overall look a bit nicer. Alright, the horse is sculpted, but oh my gosh, I had no clue I sculpt so lumpy. Let's get on to the prepping stage, because we have a lot to prep. So here's my horse. He's all sanded down at this point. I sprayed him with primer, and then I was like, you know what, I bet he's good. So I drilled my holes for the ears, I drilled a hole for the tail. Spoiler alert, he was not good. He needed like almost 10 layers of primer and sanding. It was crazy. But anyways, I jumped the gun and I started all of this way too early. This is stuff that I like to leave for after the prepping stage is done. Anyways, I made the ears by making a nubbin of wire in the horse's head and then taking a teardrop shaped piece of epoxy and putting it around the ears. I'll go more in depth into this in another video once I gain a bit more practice, but I'm pretty proud of these. I think they look really good. I did fill them down the line with some like hair detailing inside to make them look a bit more fluffy. Anyways, now for the tail. I fleshed out the armature with my painter's tape again, like I did with the neck, and I think his silhouette is starting to look really nice. It's really taking shape. So I get out my trusty 2-part epoxy sculpt and I mix equal parts again, and then I can start to apply that to the tail. Just like with the neck, I do a first pass. For the first pass, I don't focus on getting anything too nice. As you can see here, it's pretty lumpy. I do take this time to wet sand him, which means running him under some water with fine grit sandpaper. I use sandpaper anywhere between 800 to 1200 grit, and this gets the model pretty smooth. Now, after this, I thought I was really done with prepping, but I wasn't. Spoiler alert. So watch me battle it out in the next few minutes. But yeah, anyways, he was the biggest prep job I think I've ever had. Like, ever. He was very lumpy, and I wouldn't sculpt lumpy if I were you. I filled in that weird little divot I'd made on his leg because, you know, I thought it was muscling, but it looked pretty bad. Anyways, he was starting to look really good, but he was not perfect by any means. Nevertheless, I decided to sculpt the tail, which was a mistake, but oh well. I started off with all of these noodles, which I combined roughly with my silicone sculpting tool. I do this just to kind of blend the pieces, but I never find it works out for me if I make a sheet of epoxy. So having the noodles here is like already having some pre-sculpted hair, I guess. So I get out my trusty sewing needle, and then I can do basically exactly what I did with the feathers, which is make the hair strands roughly with the needle and then finesse them with the silicone sculpting tool again. And I find that this works pretty well. This isn't my favorite tail I've ever sculpted. I think I did a better job with Sleipnir's one, but I think this is pretty good for my second time sculpting a tail. You can see it's pilling a lot here, and so I smoothed that out with a wet paintbrush off camera. Now I grab my silicone sculpting tool and I can blend it all together, make it a bit nicer, a bit crisper. This also helps remove the pilling, and make sure that your tool is dipped in water when you do this. This is one side of the tail done, and I thought it was looking pretty good at this point, maybe a bit too stiff, but I sorted that out down the line. I did the same thing for the other side of the tail. I filled the ears with fluff like I mentioned earlier, and I think they look really cute. Alright, now I can start to work on the mane. I roll out noodles of epoxy like I did with the tail, and this took a lot of engineering because I actually had to get this wave look like an actual wave in real life. So I actually used some old epoxy under there. So the mane is actually quite solid. It's not empty underneath. Anyways, I took my needle and I used that same hair making process as with the tail and the feathers to create the mane. These horses have so much hair. I feel like I'm talking about hair every 2 minutes. But anyways, after the needlework was done, I smoothed it out with the silicone tool, and I'm really happy with how the mane turned out. Though I don't think it completely matches the tail. I think it's got thinner strands while the tail has thicker strands. Anyways, I added this other piece kind of hanging off the side, and I stuck it to the neck with uncured epoxy. Then I started working on the forelock, and the process was very much the same. I wanted it to cover the horse's eyes because, you know what? I don't like painting eyes, and I didn't want to paint eyes this time. Also, I thought it would make him look kind of sleepy and shaggy if his forelock covered his eyes. And I'm really happy with the silhouette of the forelock. Gosh, I am so proud of this mane and forelock. I think it looks so cool. Anyways, I love his silhouette right now. It's so perfect. So I thought I was done prepping, but alas, I was not. And so I spent so much time sanding, so much time filling in holes and cracks in the model with liquid green stuff, and just a lot of prepping and sanding overall. It was kind of tiring and a bit demotivating to just sit down in the morning and prep and prep and prep. But alas, it must be done. I sculpted the hair a bit too early, so to avoid spraying it with primer, which would fill in the detail, I actually had to use some paint along the way, which isn't ideal, but it worked. Anyways, while that's drying, let's work on the base. I first put some Mod Podge on the wood, and then I can get some dirt that I had from a previous project and sprinkle it on. I kind of compact the dirt to make sure it stays down, and here it is once it's all dirtified, I guess. I then shake off all the dirt onto my lovely desk, and then I put more Mod Podge on top of the dirt. Actually, I ended up getting some like dirt in my Mod Podge container, which isn't ideal, but oh well. I never sealed it on top because last time I did, the dirt went too dark brown. Anyways, I then take my static brass applicator and I hold the alligator clip right down to the surface, and then holding the applicator pretty low, I sprinkle on a layer of grass. I dump that off, and then I use longer grass strands in more isolated patches. I really didn't like the shoulder muscling and all the muscling really that I had put on this horse, so I decided to redo it. I'm not entirely happy with the final product either, but it's a lot better than how it was. So I used my needle to kind of carve the beginnings of the shoulder muscles into the horse. And I used reference pictures when doing this, although I don't think I did the best job. Then I actually sculpted some nostrils on the model, and that was interesting. I left the existing nostrils there, but I raised them a bit, and then I added like flared parts to the outside. So I thought the finished product looked really cool, and I think it looks really awesome when painted. This was actually the first time I'd ever done something like this, which was resculpt the face. So anyways, let's move on to finally base coating the model. I primed my model again, and I realized that, you know what, everything was good to go. So I mixed up this kind of off-white color. It's a bit gray and a bit brown, because I don't find that gray horses are completely gray. I find that they got some warm colors in them as well. So I painted over the whole model with this wide flat brush, which I find is really, really good at getting all the paint all over the model. and it doesn't leave too many brush strokes either on the later layers. When the model is fully opaque, I take him and another model whose video will be out soon, and I spray them both with sealant. Then I was like, you know what, let's take some pictures. So here are the pictures of his sculpture. All right, without further ado, let's get to adding his color with my pan pastels. I want him to be a dapple gray with some subtle dapples, and so I pull out my makeup brushes as well as my pastels. They come in these individual pans, and they can also come in big groups of pans. I'm mostly using these colors today. I add some warm tones just like I did in the paint. Then I can put on my gloves to avoid getting grease on the model, and I can do a layer of pastel in the same color as the base, which in this case is white. I put this all over the model, and I find that doing a layer of color in the same color as the base really helps blend the color that you put on top. So I'm going to be adding light gray after this. I find it blends better with a layer of pastel in the same shade as your base paint coat. You know, I'm a bit paranoid, so I go pretty light with my layers, but I'm starting to get a bit more confident with going a bit darker each time. But obviously not here. I'm going so light you can barely tell that this is gray at all. I guess I'm just terrified of bad graininess. I add extra dark pastel around the muzzle, and usually I would around the eyes, but this model has no eyes. I also add it on the feathers and the lower legs where I want the color to be basically black. Then it's on to the next layer. This is what he looks like once he gets 2 sprays of my Winsor & Newton matte sealant. So again, I do a pastel layer in the same color as the base, which is white, and then I do gray on top of that. So slowly building up the color. Here I went a bit more bold with the gray, and I added some dark color, but you can see how I kind of hesitated there. I was so scared of graininess, oh my goodness. I always go way too light, and then I wonder why, you know, it took me 10 layers to build a bay on a horse once. But this was looking really good and very grain-free. I add my pastels kind of in the raised areas of the model while the negative areas stay light. So the shoulders, the middle of the barrel, and the hind as well as the back get kind of dark color, and then the negative areas in between the shoulder and the barrel usually stay pretty light. I used to think it was the opposite, but no. As I said earlier, I want his legs to be almost black in the end, so I mixed up a dark gray color and I applied that to its feathers. It's a lot darker than the rest of the model, so I take my time to use different brushes to kind of blend it in with the rest of the model. Then I grab out my eraser pencil and I start dappling. So with dappling, I just erase the pastel that I just put there, and I do that in like little star shapes, and I try to make the pattern kind of random, but this technique works for me very well for the first 1 to 2 layers. That's what he looks like after being sealed. You can see it's quite vibrant and contrasty. So I do another layer of white, and that kind of makes the dapples subtle. And when I did the next layer of gray, I was like, wait, oh my goodness, you know, I can't see where the dapples were. So I actually used a blending stump with some white pastel where I could like barely see where the dapples had been. So I used that eraser pencil for the first few layers, and then I use the blending stump later because I really darkened the color here. Here's the effect with the blending stump. I know it looks quite like chaotic and polka dotty, but I assure you, definitely go more bold because the sealant will definitely darken the spots and lighten the body a little bit, I find. So the dapples don't show up quite as well as they do here, especially like kind of once I brush it off and make it a bit more smooth and subtle. Anyways, that is my last layer of pastel. So now let's move on to detailing with acrylic paints. You can see how those dapples really settled out there. So I mix up a light shade and I start applying a few little hairs to the face and also on the veins on the belly and anywhere that I find needs some lighter hair detailing. So oftentimes in between like the shoulders or the flank region, I find that that looks nice with some little hairs there. I do lowlights in the crevices of the hair and the feathers by using pure black, and then I also do highlights on the raised parts of the feathers with a lighter gray. Then I can paint the tail, so I use a light color, and although I didn't get the gradient part on camera, I go in with a kind of darker gray at the top of the tail and I leave the bottom light, and then I kind of blend the two together with some water and many layers. I use the same technique on the mane with the gradient at the bottom. I use the dark gray at the bottom and the light on top, and then I blend them together. But in the mane, I add a lot more streaks throughout of different colors. Here I'm doing lowlights in the cracks. And I highlight the most raised pieces of the mane and where it kind of waves there with pure white. I painted the feet in a dark gray color, and then I added some stripes in darker and lighter colors. I don't know, I haven't mastered the foot painting technique yet, but I hope to one day. They're kind of complicated to paint in my opinion. I always find them a bit tricky. Then I highlight the hair details on the inside of the ears, which you can't really see because my camera decided to go out of focus yet again. Then I sign my initials and the date on the front 2 feet of my model, and then this custom is finally finished. On April 13th, I started this project and I finished it on the 28th of June. So it's definitely safe to say that it took me a while. I am so overjoyed with the result though, and I am obsessed with the color and the sculpting. I just think everything looks so nice on this horse. The icing on the cake was that at my local agricultural fair, he actually took first in his class. So yay! I decided to name him Silfrintoppr. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that name right at all, so I am really sorry if I'm not. And it is a name from Norse mythology, meaning silver topped, literally. And I thought it was very fitting for this silver boy. Alright, anyways, I'm gonna let you watch the rest of the pictures. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really do hope you enjoyed it. And thank you so much for your support. It's been about 2 years of me being here on YouTube. So thank you all for an amazing 2 years. And I will see you all in my next video. Bye!